In the first year of running our branding agency, a manufacturing client came in and asked for a complete rebrand, and I quoted them $3,000, which was at the highest level of any quote that I ever sent. And I thought I was being very ambitious. And they said yes immediately. Absolutely no negotiations and zero questions. And I found out later that they'd budgeted $15,000 for that exact same project, and they'd been quoted that elsewhere with another agency. And I left £12,000 on this table because I didn't know how to price, and I was too afraid to ask what they'd planned to spend. And that story shaped everything about pricing and the conversations that I would have had since. And today I'm going to walk you through how to build a pricing structure that holds value without you having to explain it. If you don't know me, my name is Conor McCauley, and I built and sold a creative agency called Kaizen in Belfast. My journey started with £150 logo designs for hair salons and ended with selling 20,000 branding projects for national sporting organisations. We topped over 2.2 million in revenue, a team of 40 plus people, and I eventually exited for a multi seven-figure sum. The pricing journey from £150 logos to £20,000 branding projects wasn't this straight line. It was years of undercharging, uncomfortable conversations, winning some business, losing some pitches, and slowly figuring out that the ceiling on my prices was in my head, not in the market. I now coach agency owners on this topic exactly, and the pricing conversations are always the hardest ones. Not because the maths are complicated, but because this self-fear is real. So let me give you the buyer's perspective on pricing, because this is what actually matters if you ever want to sell your agency. A buyer is underwriting three things when they look at your commercial model: gross margin stability, client concentration, which I talked about last week, and churn, and sales cycle predictability. Custom pricing creates variance. Variance creates risk, and risk reduces your sale multiple. If you custom quote everything, you're not premium, you're unproductized, and a buyer sees this as unpredictable cash flow, founder-dependent pricing decisions, and margins that shift 10 to 15% depending on who scopes that project. Here's what I see in most agencies that I work with. The founder is the only person who can price a deal. The team can produce the work, of course, but can't hold a pricing conversation, and if someone pushes back on price, the default response is to just drop it, to discount. That's not a sales problem, that's a packaging problem in your business, and it usually starts with the weakest of positions. If a lead asks, well, why are you more expensive than the competition? And your answer is about your process, you have already lost. Nobody pays a premium for a process. They pay a premium for an outcome that they cannot get anywhere else. The agencies that learn this, or the agencies that I work with, are those ones who scale, and they're the ones who command the highest prices for their service. Okay, so we need to create positioning that holds. So let's first fix the foundation. Positioning is not your niche. It's not that we are a Shopify agency or that we do B2B design. That's a category. Positioning is the reason a buyer believes your margins are durable. And here's the structure. It's just 5 lines. We help a specific customer achieve a specific outcome by solving a specific pain using our distinct mechanism so they get a commercial result. Let me give you an example. We help B2B SaaS companies reduce customer acquisition costs by rebuilding their conversion funnel using our 12-week diagnostic and implementation model so they recover ad spend faster and scale profitably. Okay, that's wordy, but it's tight, that's repeatable, and most importantly, that gives your team something to sell that isn't "we create brands." When positioning is vague, everything downstream suffers. Pricing becomes guesswork, proposals take too long because you're scoping everything from scratch every single time, your sales cycle stretches because the client doesn't understand what they're really buying, and your margin varies widely from project to project. When the positioning is tight, you price against an outcome, not ours. You scope against a template, not a blank page every single time, and your team can hold the conversation because the offer is completely clear. So what I want to talk about now is the offer ladder. Most agencies have one offer. We do whatever you need. They think that's being flexible, but it's not. It's unpackaged, and that's why their margin will start to drift. Here's the offer model that I recommend to all of my coaching clients who sell high value creative services. Rung 1 of the ladder is diagnostic or strategy. This is fast and it's high margin. Call it an audit, call it whatever you want, call it a roadmap or even a priorities document. Ultimately, it's a low value commitment for the client and it's high value for you. And it sets up everything else that comes after it. At Kaizen, we added a paid discovery phase to our process, and it changed the entire sales dynamic. Clients who paid $2,000 to $5,000 for a strategy phase almost always moved into implementation because they'd already invested in our service and they'd seen the quality of our work and our thinking. Rung 2 then of that ladder is implementation. This is your core revenue. Defined deliverables, defined timeline, defined ownership. The key word here is, of course, defined. If you can't describe what the client gets, when they get it, and what success looks like before you even start, your scope will creep and your margin will leak. As part of our branding process, we designed and developed a number of key elements. Almost always, this would have included the identity, the brand language and the tone of voice, the color palette and the iconography, and ultimately some stock photography as well. We would have also given them the conceptualization of key deliverables and finally their brand guidelines. The output was full and it was defined properly. Anything beyond that was phase 2 or further work, which actually it brings me to some ongoing work. And that's rung 3, this ongoing optimization, where possible. Okay. Projects will lead to retainers with the clear outcomes linked to commercial objectives. Again, I've said this in every video, commercial objectives are key. Regular reporting and iteration, this is where your recurring revenue lies. Okay? The point of the ladder is not productization for the sake of it. The point of each of these rungs has a default scope, a default price brand, and default success measures. Now your agency can sell faster, onboard cleaner, forecast better, and protect their margin. And here's the real opportunity for your agency right this second. Your team can then sell it without you because the offer is structured. They're not reinventing every single proposal from scratch every single time. If you want to see how margin stability and offer structure affect what your agency could possibly be worth one day, my free agency valuation assessment walks you through that entire process. It takes less than 10 minutes and the link is in the description below. The next thing that we have to talk about is our pricing architecture. So we've already got the positioning over here and you've got that offer ladder. Now you need the pricing structure that your team can hold. And here's the system. Price bands, not fixed prices. Every rung on your ladder should have a band, not a single number, a range. Diagnostic from 2 to 5k, implementation from 10 to 20k, ongoing support between $2,500 and $7,500 per month or more. Those bands give your team room to adjust based on complexity, but it stops them from going below the floor that protects your margin. And it stops you from having to approve every single quote. And I want to talk briefly about a discount policy. Write it down straight away. Discounts up to 10% can be approved by the commercial owner. Anything beyond that requires you or I's founder approval. It's incredibly simple and it's clearly defined and it removes all of the grey area where your margins will leak. And I never wrote down a discount policy and that was my mistake. So when a salesperson wanted to close the deal, the default was, well, let's just bring it down to the next 1,000. There was no floor, no threshold, no escalation. It was just a decision that stayed with me for the longest time. I also want to talk about the £500 increment rule. And this is how I find the price ceiling at Kaizen. Every time we won a project at a certain price point, the next comparable project went out £500 or £1,000 higher. We kept doing this until people said no. And I promise you, there's not an ounce of any scientific methodology that went into that, but it worked because the alternative, which is what most agency owners do, is to just stay at the same price point forever and they wonder why their margins are flat now and decline later. Actually, right? Something else that you should consider, if you're winning more than 70% of your proposals, your prices are far too low, full stop. A healthy win rate for agencies is 50%. That means you're testing the market. You will be losing some deals on price and that's fine because the ones that you're winning are at the right margin. And if you're winning 70, 80, 90%, you probably think you're doing great, but you're not, you're just cheap. And everyone except you knows it. Okay, the next thing that we have to consider is change control. Scope changes are where margin goes to die. Every change request goes through a simple process. What's changed, what it costs, and does the client approve it before work starts? If the answer to that last question is, we'll sort it out later, you're giving away money to your clients. Okay, now I want to tell you the story of how we went from £150 logos, not 150k logos, £150 logos to 20 grand brands. Because the pricing journey is part of the story that nobody wants to talk about honestly. When I started Kaizen, I was charging £150 for a logo. And I'm not joking, that was £150. We priced the project as most start out doing. 3 hours, £50 an hour, job done. And I was grateful for the work. We were selling time, and we were selling time badly. The first time I quoted £1,000 for a brand project, I felt a wee bit sick. I remember sitting at my desk thinking, they're not going to pay that. And they did. And the quality of the work wasn't any different from the £150 version. The only thing that changed in that instance was my confidence. From £1,000 onwards, I started pushing to 2.5 grand, to 5 grand, and that £5,000 manufacturing client that I mentioned at the start, which would have been 15 grand, that one, well, it stung a little bit, but it taught me to always understand the budget before quoting. The 10 grand became 15 grand. Then we started scoping brand projects at £20,000 and winning that work regularly. Now, obviously at this point, the service had evolved significantly during that period. The inputs and the outputs were incredibly different from that £150 logo. But the real difference was positioning, packaging, and the experience that we'd created with every single successful project and, well, the confidence that we had to now hold that number. I had a coaching client recently who went through that exact same journey. They thought that they couldn't charge more than £3,000 for a website, and today they are regularly pricing £10,000 for the same scope of work. They pitched and won recently a £30,000 project, and just a year ago that would have been unfathomable to them. This agency is winning as much business as they did before. The ceiling was never the market, it was what was in their head. And here's why you want to do this. The client that you attract at £3,000 and the client that you attract at £10,000 are very different people. The higher priced clients usually are easier to work with, they're more decisive, and they're better at providing feedback and content and less likely to argue about the scope. You're not just making more money, you're building a better business. Okay, so this week there's a few things that I want you to do. 3 things in fact. First, I want you to write down your positioning statement. 5 lines: who, what outcome, what pain do we solve, what mechanism do we solve it by, and what result do we expect. If you can't fill in all 5, that's your positioning gap. Secondly, I want you to look at your last 10 proposals. What was your win rate? If it's above 70%, you need to raise your prices on the next 3 deals by 10 or 15%, or just like I did, do it by £500 and see what happens. And thirdly, I want you to look at your biggest client. When was the last time you reviewed the pricing on that account? If the answer is never or years ago, book a conversation in this month, make a plan to show them why the increase is worth it. If you want a complete picture on how your pricing and commercial model affect your agency's valuation, my free agency valuation assessment walks you through the entire process. It takes 10 minutes and the link is in the description below. And if you want the weekly frameworks on building an agency that's genuinely worth something, join over 220 other agency owners over on my newsletter, and the link again is in the description. Thank you as always for watching, and I will see you next week.